Very attentive audience. We're under pressure to start on time because we're live streaming, so I'll just have to wait till the actual 8:30. On the dot. I think we've reached that time now. I think Fergus is at the back tuning in. Okay, so I'd like to kick off just by really welcoming you all. My name is Sophie Byrne, programmer of talks and public programmes at the Irish Museum of Modern Art Dublin. For those that are joining us remotely, I'm being very specific where we're located. And I'm also chair of the Outdoors programme. Really, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's discussion. That is part of the Imma Night series of free events that we are hosting over the summer. This sees Imma actively resuming to our in-person events, and it really is great to see our audience once again and have you here joining us in person. I'd also like to welcome all those joining us remotely via our YouTube stream. Thank you all for tuning in, and I think for promises to be a very compelling discussion on the topic of art, intersectionality and the digital, with our very special guests from the recently formed research group, Stack Feminism in Digital Humanities. Before I hand you over to our guests, I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit more about the Imma programme and the impetus behind this evening's collaboration. From May to September, Imma is opening its grounds every Thursday and Friday evenings until 8:30 p.m. with an evening event series titled Imma Nights. This includes a melee of free activities from yoga, workshops, music, arts, performance, book launches and talks to bring you deeper into the Imma's programme and also to offer a platform for a diverse set of communities with varied interests. As Imma looks back on its last 30 years and reckons with its longer history of our colonial past, a common thread that's coming through all of this activity is to examine new and meaningful ways to integrate intersectional feminism and decolonising practices into all facets of our museum life. This includes our exhibitions, acquisition policies of collections and archives, and our various public, digital and outreach networks, in which to set the foundation for a new public collections and learning centre for the Imma campus. And this year we embark on a second phase of a digitisation project of Imma's rich archive holdings and acquisitions funded by the department. This is to drive towards more inclusive and diverse representation across all our programmes. And I suppose this is very apparent in our more current exhibitions. That includes the major museum-wide collection-based exhibition titled The Narrowgate of the Here and Now, and the forthcoming Xenogenesis by the Otlick Group that opens on the 7th of July. And that was a really dynamic exhibition that I encourage everyone to come, visit and enjoy over the course of the summer. these programmes very much provides the anchor for what this is, our adjacent Imma Nights programme, and which to give a platform for the artists, curators, scholars and researchers, as well as grassroots community groups to discuss societal issues and diversity and inclusion work that they are foregrounding. So it's this evening that we are very delighted to welcome our like-minded practitioners from the Full Stack Feminism and Digital Humanities to join us for the Imma Nights gatherings and events. If you're new to their work, Full Stack Feminism and Digital Humanities is a 2-year collaborative UK-Ireland research project where tonight's discussion showcases the project's aims and objectives that examines how intersectional feminist thinking can be embedded into digital practices and coding, thus aiming to provide practical tools to addressing and tackling the inequalities and biases of race, gender and class that is reproduced from the level of coding right through to all levels of representation. Imma is delighted to be one of the several partners to join the conversation, and many thanks goes to tonight's conveners, Janine Nanjel, the principal investigator of the Full Stack Feminism in Digital Humanities, and who works as Associate Professor in Digital Media at National University, along with co-investigator Catherine Nolan, an artist, curator, lecturer in creative digital media at DU, and Izzy Fox. They are joined by artist Dr. Putnam and Dave Magee. I'd like to use this moment to welcome all of our guests and thank you for inviting Imma to partner on this very valuable project. Tonight's talk will run until 7:45, where we hope you can stay with us, enjoy a drink and enjoy the music outside in our courtyard. We've got really interesting speakers to come, so I'll leave it to Dr. Izzy Fox to further introduce tonight's session and the work of the Full Stack Feminist work. Izzy is a postdoctoral researcher at National University working on the Full Stack Feminism in Digital Humanities research project. She completed her PhD in 2022 on fourth wave digital feminist activism, placing contemporary feminism in Ireland into international, historical and digital contexts. So on behalf of Imma, thank you for your kind attention, and really it's a great pleasure now to pass you over to our guests. I hope you enjoy your evening. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for that, Sophie, and it's great to be able to partner with Imma for this evening's event. And it's also so heartening to see so many of you in the room, and I know that we're joined by more people online as well. So thank you all for joining us. And so I suppose I'm tasked with the job of just introducing you to the Full Stack Feminism project, and hopefully not leaving you more confused than you were coming in. And goes for all of us as well. And yeah, so, and then just discussing some of the continuities and synergies between our project and digital art practice as well. So as Sophie said, Full Stack Feminism in Digital Humanities is a 2-year collaborative UK-Ireland project which aims to embed intersectional feminist thinking into digital practices. And so now I'll come back to some of those terms in a moment. And the project is, here we go. The project is jointly funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK and the Irish Research Council. And our full stack team is comprised of members from the Technological University Dublin, Maynooth University and the University of Sussex. And we also partner with Cambridge Digital Humanities, the Digital Repository of Ireland, and of course, Imma. We're a transdisciplinary team with members who have relevant experience both within and outside of academia, including in programming, community archives, activism, and of course, digital art practice and curation. And Full Stack Feminism in Digital Humanities seeks to address how biases and stereotypes manifest in digital projects, particularly in the academic field of digital humanities. So I'll just spend a moment now parsing our project title. and just to provide some clarity to those terms. So firstly, full stack is the term borrowed from web development that accounts for the user interface as well as the behind-the-scenes coding to ensure that the planning and design thinking is coherent and equally deployed across the whole system. So following on from this, we use full stack as a metaphor to account for the comprehensive nature of our project and our research methodologies. We work across 3 stages, or what we call stacks, that feed into each other. So stack 1 is data and archives, stack 2 is infrastructure, tools and code, and stack 3 is access, experience and integration. And working across all 3 stacks are what we call threads, namely archives, community, digital art and feminist praxis. And our feminist praxis is intersectional, which means that we acknowledge and respond to the ways in which gender, race, ability, sexuality, class, citizenship status and more overlap, resulting in privileges for some groups and marginalisation and oppression for others. Intersectional feminism in digital humanities strives for a more equal society through the process of thinking, making, coding and creating. And digital humanities itself is an area of study that is concerned with the intersection of technology and the humanities. And our definition of digital humanities is inclusive of voices and practices largely unheard and unseen in the field, and is informed by creative art practice, creative coding, and participatory research methodologies. Our goal is to contribute to improving the field of digital humanities, whereby projects, methodologies, and research teams are more equal, inclusive, and diverse. Consequently, we have a broader understanding of the digital humanities than what you would traditionally find within academic institutions, which is why we like to think of our version of DH as DH+. So now we're collaborating with communities of artists, coders, archivists and scholars to develop digital art, objects, tools, interfaces and archives that highlight the concerns of these practitioners in relation to the practical, material, institutional and technological exclusions and discrimination they've experienced in order to not only amplify marginalised voices, but also to contribute to a practical toolkit, which will be one of the material outputs of our project that can be used by digital humanities communities to create more inclusive environments and tools. We will also have a call in September or October for an artist in residence to work with the project. And next year there'll be an end of project exhibition that will be open to other artists as well. And Catherine will speak more about this. Okay, so now I'm just going to briefly discuss it's actually not that brief, sorry. I had intended it to be brief, but then I got kind of excited and carried away, so sorry. Okay, disclaimer. So to discuss the commonalities and synergies between the full stack feminism and digital humanities, our project, and digital artistic practice, to begin the conversation about how we can collaborate to address exclusions, oppressions and marginalisation within our fields. So these are just some things to kind of think about. So, for example, when we use a digital interface to interact with the world, whether that's through Google Maps or a food delivery app or on our smartphone, an online chatbot or something, more sinister like facial recognition technology, we sometimes experience errors, glitches or buffering. So the image I've chosen there is just to represent that frustrating phenomenon that we're all familiar with. Now, tech companies claim these glitches are aberrations and work to fix them. But what if, instead of being exceptions to the rule, these errors reveal a deeper truth about the systems, structures and hierarchies on which our society is built? As, say, Rua Benjamin in her book, Race After Technology, points out. For instance, scholar and activist Joy Buolamwini performed an experiment whereby she exposed the racial bias of facial recognition technology as in order for the tech to detect her black face, she had to don a white mask. So you may have seen the documentary about that as well. Okay, so what do we do then with this information? Like, do we really want to fix this glitch and make black people who are already over-policed more recognisable to facial recognition? As this tech is in the context of, say, the prison industrial complex in the USA, another arm of the surveillance capitalist or carceral state. And recent news here of facial recognition technology being introduced in Ireland shows that these concerns are not only relevant in the US context. Okay, so what has this then got to do with digital art? Well, digital art, when it engages with intersectional issues such as this, provides novel and innovative entry points that capture the embodied, affective and visceral nature of these glitches in a way that an academic text or a news report or an Oireachtas committee, cannot. So glitches are more than aberrations, as I pointed out, but what about embracing the glitch or deliberately causing the glitch? Is there transformative potential in this act of defiance? Now, Legacy Russell in her manifesto, Glitch Feminism, addresses this question. Russell argues that a body that doesn't conform to a gender binary is a glitch, and this glitch is a form of refusal. In this sense, a glitch can be a queering of the system. As Russell points out, female-identifying people, queer people, black people invent ways to create space through rupture, and it is within this disruption one finds the power of the glitch. Equally, as Sarah Ahmed has pointed out in her new book, Complaint, to complain is also a disruption and interruption to the system, the ultimate act of the feminist killjoy. And I know that Elle, one of the artists you'll be hearing from this evening, also uses the term the aesthetics of interruption. So both our project and digital art that engages with intersectional feminist themes can be read as forms of complaint against or interruption to what Bell Hooks calls the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. In relation to the art world, this manifests as the hegemony of canonical art, i.e., dead Western white guys, and its continuing legacy in terms of what and who gets funded to create art and given space to exhibit. This is why this partnership with Imma is so important, and why the role of the artist in residence and the end of project exhibition are also key components of full Stack Feminism's community engagement. So when to fix and when not to fix, that is the question. What does a fix look like? Who gets to fix these glitches? Or when do we reconfigure, repurpose or remix? These are all questions that our project grapples with, while always being cognizant of Audre Lorde's immortal words that the master's tools can never dismantle the master's house. Similarly, digital artistic practice can also address these tensions. Rather than swiftly moving to fix the glitch, the process of reflecting, critiquing, creating, curating and exhibiting involved in making and displaying art provides the time and space to have these conversations, and this evening's event is the beginning of such a conversation. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of questions and themes at you, so I hope I haven't bamboozled you, but rather, provided food for thought for the upcoming presentations. And just if you're interested in anything I've said, you can get in touch with us, and you can tweet. You can use the hashtag FSFTH. We're on Twitter and Instagram then as well. And we're starting to become more active on our socials, as they say. So then without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Catherine Nolan, who is a co-investigator on our project. Catherine's an artist and curator, specialising in gender and new media. She also lectures in creative digital new media at TU Dublin, and she's going to chair this evening's event and introduce you to our artists. Thank you.
Hi everybody, wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you for attending, and thanks Izzy for that great introduction to the project. Loads there to think about. And thank you also to Sophie and Imma for hosting us here tonight. So we're really here, delighted to be here as part of the Imma Nights programme. Oh yes, my slide is there, great. So our talk, to the discussion, art, intersectionality and the digital. So we're going to have an artist discussion tonight, and in terms of the Full Stack Feminism project, this really is our way, I suppose, of thinking with artists. So within this project, we really think of art as a really powerful form of knowledge production. So this is part of our method. So we're delighted to have our artists here to think with us and to think through some of these themes this evening. So we are going to ask our artists to give a 10-minute presentation of their practice in relation to this theme. And then we're going to have a discussion for about 20 or 30 minutes. We'll see. Our cue will be when the music gets too loud in the courtyard. That's when we think we can't resist and we have to go and get out there and have a drink. And continue our discussion there, of course. Let me just... excuse me, what happened there? I went on to my last slide. Hold on a second. Technical glitch. There we go. There we go. I'll claim that one. Yeah, there we go. Did that on purpose. So our artists tonight, Putnam, Janine Magee and Dave Magee. My apologies, our advertised artist, Danielle, who we were excited to talk about Black trans experience with tonight, wasn't able to make it, but we have these fantastic artists, and I think it'll be a really, really rich discussion. Yes, that's everything, I think. So I'm just going to call on Elle, if you'd like to come up, and I will escape from this and find. Would you like to open up yourself? Yeah. You might want to press play, so I don't want to begin too early.
Hello, everybody. All right, there's a mouse. Oh. Nothing prepared me for motherhood. The experience of sharing my body, subjectivity, time, energy, and sense of being with another person that is emotionally and physically completely dependent on me surpasses verbal description. As an artist, I use my practice to navigate what exceeds the limits of my understanding in order to make sense of the world. Becoming a mother has been no exception, especially in Ireland, where there are particular gendered expectations of mothers within culture and society. I recall feeling a sense of intense alienation as I broke down sobbing in the long line of pregnant people at the National Maternity Hospital in Dublin during my first medical appointment. I work predominantly with performance and digital technologies, which includes creative coding and physical computing. My work has involved performance to video and net art, though at the moment I am engaging with digital technologies as a means of creating and mediating performance, with the virtual existing as a performance space. When I began work in creative coding, I focused on manipulating and altering still and video images through glitching, such as pixel sorting and data moshing, as well as using sensors and other wearables to translate gestures into light and sound. I described the work as cultivating an aesthetics of interruption. According to Moyna Sullivan, the aesthetics of interruption, quote, bears witness to the fragmented, interrupted consciousness of the mother, quote. The result of this aesthetics of interruption is an opportunity to, quote, rethink the possibilities of subjective experience, end quote. At the same time, the visual and sonic interruptions that accompany digital technologies, glitches, noise, lag, shifting pixels, latency, delays, dissynchronicity, and so forth, have given rise to an aesthetics that emerges from machine breakdown. Just as the aesthetics of interruption draw attention to the maternal, the aesthetics of computer breakdown constitutes an aesthetics of interruption that bring the material aspects of digital and electronic technologies to the fore, including their social relations and infrastructures. Breakdown is not the deviation, but the norm. Breakdown correlates to what Lisa Barrister describes as the maternal's, quote, moments of undoing, end quote, when the mother is thrown off kilter through interruption. My work in creative coding uses open source programs, including processing in Arduino, using a self-taught approach where I generally develop the skills needed to create a desired project. Through this method, I become familiar with the limits of computational technology, as what I tend to envision tends to exceed what CPU allows. A project evolves as it unfolds, as I come to understand the affordances and constraints of my materials and media, also adjusting performed actions in response to these parameters. Working with code does not mix well with caring for small children, as it involves focus and concentration that counters the interrupted experience of parenting. Therefore, projects tend to be piecemeal, crafted in parts during stolen moments of time. COVID-19 brought everything closer to home. At the start of the pandemic, the closure of daycares and primary schools required that I homeschool my eldest child while caring for a toddler and working full-time. Formerly distinctive spheres now merged. In addition, in order to maintain physical distance and prevent the spread of this novel, highly contagious form of the coronavirus, has meant that personal interactions beyond immediate spheres have moved to virtual platforms. I continued to make artwork at this time, often in a needs-must manner, such as shooting with a smartphone camera and a gimbal, while working more and more in a fragmented fashion. The aesthetics of interruption persisted in my work, but the glitch moved from the image to my body. And in this video, which is part of a longer piece called All Kinds of Disintegration, it was actually a great instance of the aesthetics of interruption in action. I had gone to this field of dandelions with my children, thinking I would get these wonderful shots of dandelions, bringing them toys so they could play, but they decided they wanted to help me with the shoot. It was this moment of maternal ambivalence where our agencies conflicted. So while I left the shoot frustrated, I then went back and re-edited it around these interruptions, making them the core of the work, and then using the data moshing to kind of emphasize that quality of it there. They're very helpful. If you stick around, you'll get to meet them. As the months progressed, I became more interested in developing generative animations and interactive works using P5.js, the JavaScript version of processing. Unlike the original version of this open source software that requires a specific integrated development environment, an IDE, that must be downloaded onto a computer, P5.js is more flexible and even has a web editor. This means I could code on my iPad after my children go to sleep, generally with one nuzzling beside me. I turned to more minor creative acts, a daily sketching practice, which functioned as maintenance, bits that accumulate, but lacking overarching consistency or planning. Such activities drew me into the present, with this focus on the act of making. Little, if any, investment was placed on the output, but instead there were attempts to foster a little joy at the ability to communicate something I could not quite articulate. They also functioned as ways of marking time. Within some sketches, like the one you see here, I began to incorporate biometric data collected from my Fitbit. Heart rate, activity minutes, steps, sleep data. In this one here, the data from my heart rate on a random day selected during the lockdown, the first lockdown of the pandemic, is used to inform the changes in colors of the squares as they rotate. My intention was not to provide a more complete picture of my quantified self. Unlike data visualizations, I was interested in introducing obfuscation and abstraction in order to convey the affective qualities of the time. The grinding persistence of the pandemic has brought sensations of general exhaustion, enduring tiredness that never seems to abate with sleep, and signs of burnout as responsibilities mount, lulling body and soul into a state of lethargy. U.S. artist Amelia Winger Bearskin created a banner for the 2020 Awakening Project in the U.S. that states, quote, "What is made bright by the loss of your light," end quote. This statement, made in solidarity with mothers and female identifying carers, encapsulates the ongoing grind of this pandemic, the disruption of care networks, and the isolation of the family and individuals during this period. At this point, I've come to question my cherished aesthetics of interruption, instead just feeling burnt out. Thank you.
Thank you, Elle, for that fantastic presentation, really strong visuals there, and obviously fantastic kind of reflections on that as well. So I'm not going to dwell too much. I'm just going to hand over to Janine Magee and her presentation of her practice. You're in there somewhere. Thank you.
Okay. My short talk, entitled A Love Song for Computers, aims to highlight and recognize the contribution of computers to my artistic practice and expression. The computer for me is my muse. It comforts me. It is my friend, sometimes my enemy. I know I spend too much time on it. My data is being harvested, that I am contributing to the neoliberal commodification of society, that I need to go outside, exercise, eat some vegetables, make some real friends. But as a Gen Xer, I also remember how mind-numbingly bored and quite frankly lonely I was before a computer arrived in my house. So just for today, I'm going to show you a sample of some of my techno-feminist literary art practice. In my work, I try to instill feminist values to the best of my ability, but using an infrastructure that is so tied to Western capitalistic power structures, it can be a challenge, but it is still worth trying so that we may reclaim our tools of communication and expression. This is why, as a writing tool, our relationship with computers is much more complicated than with the pen, or even typewriter. The computer is not a passive participant, but an agent that will often only let you do certain things. And it is these constraints that make literary arts practice so unique. The Rubaiyat, the first project of mine that I'm going to talk to you about, was conducted under the rubric of a Fulbright Tech Impact Award at the Department of Literary Arts in Brown University. The Rubaiyat used Brown University's interactive and immersive stereo 3D audio-visual environment, also known as the Cave, to make a digitally mediated work of poetic language art while studying the Cave as a media system for digital literary practice. This project used the Cave to explore notions of translation, multiculturalism, and the impact of technological affordance on literary expression and reception. A digital version of the poem, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, was created, one that allowed the user to experience simultaneously different translations that exist for this work. Potentially, this provides the reader with an opportunity to gain equal access to alternative versions, some of which may fall outside of the mainstream. For example, the Digital Cave version not only includes the well-known translation by Edward Fitzgerald, but also an unknown version by a Mrs. H.M. Caldwell, a Persian scholar who dedicated her life to this translation and the study of Persian language. The audio for the piece used the singer Kulthum's rendition of the Egyptian poet Ahmed Rami's translation of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. An Irish language version is also used, as this is intended to represent my multicultural identity as an Irish Iraqi woman. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is the title that Edward Fitzgerald gave to his translation of a selection of poems originally written in Persian and numbering about 1,000 attributed to Omar Khayyam. Fitzgerald's first translation was in 1859, and Mrs. H.M. Caldwell, known as Jessie E. Nash before her marriage, was the first woman to translate the Rubaiyat. Her translation was published posthumously in 1899. To Jessie Cadell, the version by Edward Fitzgerald was a poem on Omar rather than a translation. She also rejected the translation as inaccurate, which in her eyes leads, and this is a quote from her, leads the non-expert to view all kinds of obscurities in an old Persian poet that he can interpret to his own liking and hold the results thereof for pearls of Oriental philosophy. Health conditions were a continuous battle for Jessie Nash, and she died in Florence at the age of 39. My next project is Machine's Wake. It's a browser-based, human and AI-authored interactive narrative that interleaves memories and photos of the lives of my mother, her mother, and my daughter, along with quotes generated by a GP2 machine learning algorithm that was trained on James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Machine's Wake is situated in the start of the second machine age that we inhabit, and attempts to deal with the temporal distortion experienced by the individual during COVID lockdowns as their world shrunk and memories rose to the surface. The integration of quotes generated by a GP2 algorithm trained on the already fluid and multilinear text of Finnegan's Wake means that it becomes impossible to discern where the human begins and the machine ends, highlighting the cyborg reality that we all have now become terminals at the end of a global digital text of pandemic, emergency, remote working and learning practices. In the depths of the first coronavirus lockdown, I turned to Twine to help release some of the pressure I was feeling, and as a way of expressing the feelings of time dilation that many of us were experiencing. Writing in new media offers the same type of release as traditional forms did, and now that the pandemic has pushed humanity off the edge of the digital acceptance that we were teetering on, we need stories that reflect our hybrid reality, as so many more of us now spend more time online socializing, working, and playing. Twine is an open source tool for telling interactive nonlinear stories, so a more accessible tool than any of the others that I've used in my work. I wrote Machine's Wake in lockdown, and in it I buried many things that I have never, could never, would never, will never tell anyone. The non-linear hypertext seemed a perfect form to reflect the elasticity of time that so many of us experienced during lockdown. Events that took place decades before seemed to have occurred only yesterday, while simultaneously we felt like we had been catapulted into a dystopian future. We all binge-watched 90s movies online as if they were historical relics from a time past. In 2016, I gave birth to my daughter. 2 years later, my mother died, and 2 years after that, we were in lockdown. I found myself lost in an alien landscape, so far removed from the life that I had lived for decades that I struggled to contextualize it. I began to think of my grandmother, my mother, me, and my daughter, a timeline continuum of mothers and daughters to anchor me. I sifted through the digital collection of photos that my family had digitized after my mother's death, when we were faced with boxes and boxes of family memories. And I sifted through the text generated by a GP2 algorithm and tried to make sense of it all. Digital storytelling can be a transformative practice, and many of us have meaningful cultural and indeed social experiences through computers. There is in a way safety in that. Many of us have lost our capacity to tolerate large crowds, and the intensity of face-to-face communication can feel overwhelming, especially for sensitive issues. In that way, by allowing us time and space for self-reflection, interactive stories like Machine Wake can offer us entry points into human experiences and self-expression that feels right for today's world. The River poem was my first experimentation with the GP2, and it's a Data City digital poem that projects snippets of text generated by the GP2, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer 2 Machine Learning Algorithm, onto a 3D model of Dublin City. The words themselves were generated by the algorithm that was trained on James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, appropriate for today, which I think is Bloomsday, isn't it? Oh. Which is a narrative that is ideally suited to transposition to the digital medium because of its multi-linear stream of consciousness style and its neologistic language. We share our world with machines, and this began quite some time ago with the first age of machines, which spanned the early to mid-20th century, and refers to an era of humanity in which our progress was driven primarily by technological innovation brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Humans were no longer reliant on human or animal labor. Instead, we could, for example, harvest and transport large quantities of produce with tractors and trains. Now we are in the second machine age, when we no longer have to rely on human brain power, and instead we are using computers and algorithms, such as the GPT-2, to calculate, think, remember, and most importantly, write literary texts. There is the extreme example of programmer Zach Toot's decision to finish George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Fans had long despaired waiting for the final installment to be written. Zach, therefore, decided to get an artificial neural network to read what had been written so far and then write the ending. The River poem intends to offer audiences an alternative approach to viewing the city by projecting words onto the 3D model. Snippets of phrases were removed from the algorithm's output by the human authors and then placed in a spreadsheet. Python code and Touch Designer software then randomly selects a new quote from the spreadsheet at specific intervals and places it in a queue. This queue forms a long string of text which is animated along a path that follows the route of Dublin's River Liffey. When a quote reaches the end of the path, it is automatically swapped out for a new random quote. All my projects are quite hard to show you in a 2D format, as they're all 3D digital projects, but hopefully I'm giving you a bit of a sense of them. The final output creates a dynamic, unique literary experience for each instance of play and explores notions of human versus machine agency and multimodal data communication in contemporary cityscapes. The original inspiration for the river poem was cento poetry, which is a kind of patchwork poetry that is composed of lines from other poems. However, the addition of the machine learning aspect has produced a contemporary literary artifact that calls into question the boundary between human literary expression and algorithmic agency. My profile image on the left of the screen is actually how the machine sees me. It is a machine learning interpretation of my selfie. And the quote on the right is from Robert Pirsig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, published in 1974. It was a seminal work that attempted to explore the search for meaning in a modern world increasingly shaped by technology. This was of particular concern in the 1970s, as technologies developed for the space race permeated the everyday lives of humans, with televisions, cars, and washing machines touted as essential components of every Western affluent home. Pirsig, in relation to technology, observes that the art of the work created through the use of the machine is just as dependent on the machine as it is on the human in terms of how we choose to use the machine. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Really interesting reflections there on our relationships to machines. And I'm going to call Day to come and talk about their practice.
This is a localized gradient of consciousness referred to as Day Magee. It has functioned within its social conditions as a performance-centered multimedia artist for a little over 10 years now. Further still, it has identified and functioned as non-binary in gender identity, chronically ill by a chronic pain, neurodivergent, diagnosed just earlier this week with autism, and has having been raised in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. These characteristics have generated traumas including sexual violence, conversion therapy, and grief. Language is hereby taking place. Speaking now is a voice in response to a series of performed images. These images document live performances and performances to camera that are augmented, such as with digital drawing. They will not be individually explained here, rather summarized in a narrative through line. I invite you to let them wash over you as you listen. They have before referred to their performances, that is, this, as stylized rituals relative to their worldview, their lived ideology, emergent forms of a process. Their experience functions as an ideological basis for religious expression. They consider faith to be their principal, prospective material. Often, these performances feature their body, the locus of their experience, interacting with physical or digital objects such as props or drawings, totems conferred with narrative significance. The body is animated live through movement in response to its previously recorded voice, say, in a monologue or self-dialogue playing over the space, the recording itself an artifact of their past. The recorded voice performs writings gleaned further still from the body's past experiences, themselves previous temporal forms. Akin to the art of drag, their body synchronizes its behavior, or its enactment, with its cumulative psychological self-mythology, the story one tells themselves about themselves. This mythology evolves over time, garnering votive or religious imagery like a tapestry depicting an interior culture, canon, or ecosystem. The multiple past selves interact with one another and the present self, a series of performed temporal images stacked upon one another in sedimentary layers of consciousness, extruded through time in auto-historical reenactments. Performance art is the medium of a body directed in time, space, and witness. The witness is not only on the part of the audience, but the performing body to itself. The mind is a constituent of the body, itself a surveillance culture and material to be shaped. Perception from multiple and simultaneous vantage points collectively function to consolidate a temporal event, recording it. The numerous I-beams, as T.S. Eliot would have called them, crossing over one another in an undulating grid or a net, catching what's happening. This is the same medium as one's everyday life. Our bodies are conditioned through the practiced embodiment of language to one another. Over the course of their practice, the artist performs themselves to themselves in a collaborative becoming between its temporal iterations, last and present, to produce futurity, past and present, I should have said. Incidentally, in lieu of the heteronormative reproductive paradigm, here possibly a queer futurity may be formed. Performance may be a technology of self-creation, the artist enacting themselves. The conceit of a performance is its durational suspension of the social contract. The artist's bodily traversal of space, time, and witness, inhabited and navigated on terms closer to freedom, if not deviance. These performances, these windows of time, may even function to widen the trajectory of one's perspective consciousness. The digital realm functions similarly, whether as a queer youth discovering what lay beyond the theological boundaries of evangelical Christianity through the internet, or it being the sole window to the outside world when rendered bedbound by illness for nearly years at a time. Identity and personal narrative could be conferred upon the glass through sight, touch, and cognition in a feedback loop. Through social media, a body constructs a digital altar, a graven image upon code. It depicts itself to others, but also to itself, convincing itself of itself in an increasingly sophisticated, possibly even schizophrenic, confirmation bias. Despite the vast nuance of its experiences, the body can reflect the binary encoding of digital space. The body, as extruded through time, flexes between two polarities: acceptance versus resistance, an exchange of two values such as nothing versus something, yes versus no, zeros versus ones, male versus female. The infinite permutations between these polarities, various degrees of acceptance versus resistance, invoke the countless grays that confound and characterize our experience. A body is written. A body is being written. Written being. An algorithm generating experience. 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 Similar to a word losing its meaning to absurdity in its repetition, so perhaps may behaviors and their motivations. Through repeating themselves, an ideological inflation of self-concept may occur over time. This may therefore render a conceptual plasticity through time, wherein these narratives previously acute in their enactment can lose their meaning, or meaning can widen, selfhood itself thereby becoming pliable and material. In repeating something as truth, it eventually becomes untrue, or perhaps the narratives or forms upon which truth is carried atrophy, having become vestigial, obsolescent, having served their purpose in favor of something greater. Thereby, notions of a fixed identity may be shed so that being itself as a process becomes the material. This can function on an individual level, but perhaps also a collective level. This is reflected as well in psychotherapy, in which between doctor and patient, a mythology is freely associated, established and repeated until a new perspective or a new narrative must be recognized and enacted. You must change your story eventually. You must thereby understand yourself at once as both a reliable and an unreliable narrator. As our values are inscribed upon time and space, both physical and digital, they may function as potential catharsis. We may yet let go of them, though they may also morbidly function to chain us to them, trapped in and lost to a cycle of repetition. A popular description of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting change to spontaneously arise. Eventually, one must risk one's undermining what it has previously understood about itself, which has also meaningfully sustained it in order to understand itself further. I've been telling the same story in various ways for a long time, to myself as much as to anyone who'd listen. Now, however, I find beyond the content of the story I tell that I can tell at all. What am I telling? What am I telling myself? What am I telling you? My practice has arguably for some time functioned as trauma porn, convincing myself of the pain I'm in, because on some level I have not allowed myself to believe that I am in pain. Pain is the body's primordial language, telling itself what it is experiencing, causing it to accept and resist, to zero and to one, from moment to moment, day to day, year to year, back and forth in a dynamic rhythm across a life. I am at a pivotal point now in my life and my practice, where I must choose what I believe moving forward. I hope that I choose wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Day. And if I can invite all of the artists to come sit with us and we'll have a chat. And just to let you know as well, while the artists take their seats, so again, we're live streaming, so we will try and remember to use our mics. But when we open the floor to questions as well, we'll probably repeat the question into the mic so that it can be heard for the online stream, just in case you think we're doing some weird performance thing where we're repeating your question. Lovely. So, just turn my mic here. Can you hear me okay down there? Oh, yes. That makes sense. So thanks again to our artists for their talks. Really interesting, rich, really different approaches, I think, which there's so much to think about and to talk about. So, but I suppose I would like to, I'm bringing myself back. I'm like, will I ask this, will I ask that? Let's focus on the theme. So art, intersectionality and the digital. And I suppose I'll begin with intersectionality. And I suppose we always recognise the roots of intersectionality in Black feminism. And we can think about race, class and gender as our kind of core intersectional kind of forms of oppression, but of course they are myriad. We might think about intersectionality to refer to multiple forms of oppression and how they operate together, but we can also think of intersectionality as a critical tool, particularly to address questions of representation or questions of underrepresentation. And particularly lived experiences that are underrepresented. So I wonder if the artists could speak to how they mobilise lived experience in their practice and how they're kind of making particularly invisible lived experiences visible through the work. And if anybody wants to bite on that one.
Well, I suppose in my presentation I talked about how pain for me, as not just as someone who has experienced chronic pain, but in general, kind of functions for me as my body's my primordial language. And to that end, in a very straightforward way, I suppose my practice acts as the constant attempt to approximate, to translate that language, to translate that pain. Particularly, I think, when I can't, as you say, it may exist invisibly, at least to myself. I can't see myself represented or my experiences as my language understands it in the world, and thereby I transcribe it in the form of texts, media.
Great, fantastic.
Go ahead.
I'll go. So I think, I mean, with my work, can people hear me? Oh, hello. So yeah, with my practice, I mean, my practice has always really been about creating work coming from life experience, and a lot of times trying to make sense of it. As I explained, art and philosophy for me have really been ways to make sense of a world that just does not make sense. And I think with this, and even before the work I had done regarding my experience of becoming a mother, it's like one of my big pieces some years before that was like a breakup piece where I asked people to write me anonymous postcards where they would write messages to someone that they loved and lost, but the only requirement is they had to end it with the sentence, "I wish you no ill will." And that is because my partner had said that during our breakup. Which I just thought was such a weird statement, or funny statement to make. It stuck with me. And I made art about it. That's how I cook. But no, it's and I think especially with the work coming out of the maternal, I think so much about that experience. And not just finding representations of motherhood, just not meeting my experiences of it, but so much of becoming a mother that I found cannot be translated into words, and even in images it's hard. The project Milk Drunk, which is the images you saw with the watercolors and the white figure, that I had made after the birth of my second child. When I was nursing her, I would draw these little doodles of her using a white oil pastel and then just paint over them with blue and green. And I did that for a while, and I just got this big stack of these watercolors. That's all I could do. I couldn't do that first few weeks of postpartum. It's just, I felt drunk even though I hadn't taken anything. Just like, ugh. That's all I could do. And then what I did is I scanned them all and I put them into an algorithm that randomly generated an animation out of that. I really like this idea of having an animation that doesn't end, but also never repeats. And so I would then, in the performance with that, I kind of scribbled over them, interrupting the images. So a lot of times it's about using art to express things that don't make sense, and that I just want to share that experience there. So, Ginny, your turn.
I have my own personal microphone. I normally have been telling other people's hidden stories in my work. So the Rubaiyat, I think Jessie Nash, to discover her translation and be able to use the project to bring her story to the fore, because the main name that everyone recognizes with the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is Edward Fitzgerald, of course. So bringing her story to the fore was interesting, and also finding a way to incorporate my narrative in there and maybe bring other languages into the Rubaiyat, which is challenging. For example, I put Arabic language in there, but the software I was using can't understand Arabic script, which is cursive, which changes depending on the character that is in front or after it. So, things like that are not straightforward, and those are the sort of technological constraints that prevent maybe non-standard Western narratives being foregrounded, because it's just literally harder to do it in the software, because the software has been created for Western typeface. So to incorporate the Arabic text into that project, I had to put it in as images as opposed to text. Then Machines Wake was probably the first time that I was very explicitly using my story in there, so that's particularly weird to talk about.
But it is such a weird thing, but it's so important, and I think that is kind of, I was going to say, of course, we're performance artists, so we have no problem talking about ourselves, or, you know, but it is this strange thing of like presenting yourself and presenting your lived experience. But again, when we think about our intersectionality as this critical tool, it is so important. So there's lots there actually, you know, about unspeakability, about transcribing, translating language, and really as well, it's kind of the unspeakability of embodiment as well. That's kind of quite interesting how you're all kind of using language or machines or coding to kind of get there. So thank you for that, and flip back to my questions. I might just ask one more question because we're kind of tight on time, but I really want to ask this one, and then I'll open it to the floor. So I want to ask about data and categories. So one of, I suppose, our core principles in the full stack feminist theme is challenging this idea of data as neutral. So challenging the idea that numbers speak for themselves. So as Kevin Guyan says in Queer Data, you know, numbers always speak for someone. So we think a lot about challenging categories in our project, and categorizations, both as, you know, categories as fixing and as exclusionary. So I suppose I'd like to ask the artists, you know, how do you challenge categories or use categories in your practice, or how do you kind of challenge the use of data as well in your practice?
Use this one. Of course,
a better mic,
you.
Is it?
I think so. Oh, so I'm a non-binary person with ASD, with a chronic illness. I sound like a Tumblr profile from like 2012. It's like, and it's strange. Like part of me actually kind of resents that categorization in a way, and yet I am a living categorization, regardless of those inherent limitations. I find increasingly, even in regards to my practice, in terms of even calling it performance art, I increasingly use the word enactment a lot, because I think increasingly for me, being, if not enactment, if not living, is the actual language for me, the principal language that I think data is only ever trying to approximate. But it's strange because, of course, we are all each individually and collectively, and individually, collectively, depending on specific combinations of people, we are collecting archives. Our bodies are archives, but our archives are also living themselves. They're simulating their own realities in tandem with one another. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
I like it.
Okay, I'll go. Maybe. Should I use this mic? Sorry, Jean. You bragged about having
the best mic,
and now we're all taking your mic. So, I mean, I think of my work not just about glitching art, but a lot of it is about glitching the maternal and glitching what it means to be a mother, and starting with my own experience. But then I also wrote a book where I look at other artists working with digital technologies and the maternal in their work, and how they're also challenging it. And the phrase I use to describe people like me are strange mothers. And it's not thinking strange as a kind of derogatory statement, but thinking about how it's using art to challenge these kinds of expectations of what it means to be a mother, and especially as, you know, a US citizen coming into Ireland and not really knowing the history here until I was sitting in that maternity hospital. Yeah. So a lot of my work had come out of that experience, because, and then also, but the second time I was pregnant was during the 2018, during the repeal vote, and I can't vote. So it was also feeling like going to the maternity hospital with like posters of no, and then me flipping off the posters, very heavily pregnant. Very angry. But in terms of data, I mean, explicitly my work has been using data. My pandemic series has been using my Fitbit. I found it very hard to make performances, so I used my Fitbit to track my actions and turn that into art, so it's like performance. But really, like I said, it's not about making it clear, like the sleep piece, the picture, the one you saw of what work does is it was animating. I used the data of sleep levels to animate the photographs that you saw in that. And really, it was that built on that sensation where I was supposed to be getting a good night's sleep according to this, but I was exhausted all the time. And how to translate that, like the numbers do not show that. The numbers do not show that experience. And so instead making this kind of glitchy, awkward, that work also has data sonification. And so it's got this kind of sine wave soundtrack that this goes up and down and that. And I decided not to include audio today, but it's questioning data. And I mean, and actually Day, you made the point there where I really do think of the body as the database of lived experience. It's like the numbers have so much, but there's so much we carry in our bodies with us, but don't always think about it because you can't always put it in an Excel spreadsheet. So I don't like Excel spreadsheets. Oh wait, I have to give your microphone back now.
Bring back the good mic.
Yeah. So in terms of data, with my work is I like the ephemerality of digital data. You know, you mentioned your performance artists, but actually each of those works is a performance piece by a computer, because each time an algorithm runs, it's an instance, it's a performance. When you run it again, it's different. You may not notice the difference, but it is different whether you look at it on your iPhone or your computer. So I like to make work that you can't save, that you can't document, which is problematic for my career, but never mind, that only a few people can experience at one time. And it really raises interesting questions of when a piece was made. What date do you give it? Is it when you made it? Is it when it was run? How can digital work like this be preserved for future generations? A lot of work is made for a particular operating system. Technology changes all the time, software changes all the time, so even if we do manage to preserve some of the algorithms and run digital artwork again in 10 years, it's a completely different artwork because it will be a completely different operating system. Everything changes so fast, so it's an impossible task to keep hold of this, and it's like sand through your hands. So my approach is to let it go.
Yeah, and it's one of the other questions I had was going to be again about that idea of liveness, and I think it's very interesting, this tension between, you know, art, whether it's digital art or performance, as intentional, and then that letting go when you have to allow something to run and see what happens. And then of course, yeah, the very annoying thing when it's over and you've no record. Fantastic, thank you all. I wonder if anybody would like to ask any questions or reflections or anything like that. And I'll repeat your question as well. Yeah. You want to bring?
We can share it.
Bring that mic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Turned on. Testing. I think it's because you were going to.
Hang on, let me see. It should be fine now. You're okay. First of all, I want to thank all of you who put this together. It was to the point. I didn't feel I was not learning something, and it feels to me that you feel you represented yourselves appropriately. Do you feel that way? Because this is really great. And also thank you to Imma for putting this together. And I'm just here because I'm researching something, and I come from, you know, my story is important to me, but I'm going to ask questions because they relate to what I'm particularly interested in. One is, first of all, about the depression that you experienced after you had your first baby. I've also been a mother, or am a mother. Do you feel, or did you sense that the fact that you were working with a screen, that exacerbated your depression at all? Because I find working on screens, it just pulls me right down. It's physiological. And if that had any effect, or if you could take long breaks away from working on a computer in any way, that helped you in any way to let your mood change.
Just to clarify, no, I didn't mean it was depression per se. It was more just kind of that postpartum emotional whirl.
And I'm asking about, I'm asking about the interaction between your body and the computer itself at that time in your life. If you felt it amplified normal postpartum depression, for example.
Well, with that time, like the work I was describing, Milk Junk, was actually an analog work where I was working on paper. And I was continuing, because I think at that, it wasn't just the screen though, it's also just the challenges of the time. Because it's, so I don't think it was a matter of working with the screen so much. I think even after the birth of my first child, because even though I use digital tools, I also create performances that are not, so focused on the use of tech. And then with Milk Drunk, that was the piece where it was about using Karandash and paper. So it was, but that's also just because of, especially during that early period, it's very much like needs must, and being there and being present. So I know that doesn't really answer the question, but I wasn't really using the screen like I do now, or definitely not after COVID. So, that later when I would do the coding with the iPad, I've gone with the screen more, but I think postpartum, and it was also just impossible. You can't really sit with the baby on the laptop. It's a bit awkward. I tried.
You got to try the one-handed phone.
And then I just had a general question. What was the decision-making process not to include sound? Because I do, sound is my thing. And so I'm curious how you felt either limited or it helped you to present your ideas, please. Thank you.
Well, repeatedly in my own work, as I mentioned, whether I perform it live or my body responds to it recorded previously, I very much consider my voice actually to be sound. Obviously it's literally sound, but in terms of dynamic rhythm, voice being the production of a dynamic rhythm, its peaks, its valleys, it itself as a material, you yourself know, working with sound, is it's both performative,
I just want to discuss in the format I chose today, there was no sound, and what was the decision?
Sorry, do you mean no sound art?
No sound across the art,
there was no
the
sound as they
presentation.
were presenting, and nothing from the art itself. It was voice and images, very good, but there was a reason probably that you didn't want to have audio as well feeding into.
Not a thematic. It wasn't a thematic decision. Yeah, it just arose that way. Yeah.
Some of the videos I had did have sound, but it was practical because I knew I'd be giving the talk, and it just it was a practical decision.
It's always a balance, I think, particularly when you've got video or live works or anything like that, and you've got to talk as well. And I gave you 10 minutes. I gave you 10 minutes, which is really small, and there's the jazz. So yeah. Probably practical.
Do we have another? People are terrified of the microphone.
Hi everybody, thank you very much. It was really interesting.
It's really for the live stream.
Okay.
I just wanted to hold it and just
I'm just thinking this out loud.
because otherwise people understand.
Oh sure.
There we are. Good.
I'm wondering, a lot of what the stories that you're presenting or expressing are intimate stories. And I was thinking of like second wave feminism and domesticity coming in as a kind of subject. And do you think that working with digital, bringing intimacy into it, is the thing that glitches the system in some way?
Digital intimacy is a particular interesting concept. I think the feeling of intimacy is quite characteristic in the digital medium, in that we feel we are being intimate with others. Of course, we're not really. We're quite far apart from other people. And we behave as if we know in detail people online. So is it a glitch in a system? No, I think it's actually quite a familiar characteristic of the digital, but whether it's genuine intimacy, as one can define it, or not, is another question, which, because it's, again, back to that word, it's performed a lot of the time. It's performed intimacy. So we don't really know what or who the person on the other end of the terminal is or like. One of my favorite memes is, on the internet no one knows if you're a dog, so you just so it's an artificial intimacy of a type, but hey, we get it where we can.
Weirdly, I feel like if there's any capacity for intimacy, it's potentially with yourself, because I find even in mediating or navigating intimacy with other people online, say with like a partner or even a friend, whatever, if I'm actually in some way reaching them or not, I'm suddenly, in a quite live sense, seeing, oh God, I really did say that. I said that to another human being, and you become intimate to yourself. And I think with intimacy, there's kind of risk involved that interrupts your sense of self-concept, if not the concept of the relationship, of the interaction, of your capacity, like what you're truly capable of, even if it's just, I don't know, through words. Yeah.
I like to think too, with this pandemic, there's been new forms of intimacy, like the fact that, it's like teaching a class from your bedroom while your children are running around.
I really feel like I've gotten better at small talk.
Yeah.
It becomes quite necessary to talk about the weather.
Yeah. No, it's and like I've referred to this in other contexts. Like there's a phrase in digital culture called context collapse, which is to describe when Danny Boyd was one of the people that coined it, where you get different realms of your experience. Like when you go to work, you usually talk and perform a certain way as opposed to your friends, as opposed to your parents. It's like you behave differently. But online, we'll be sharing the same story to everybody. And in some instances, that could mean people would self-censor to avoid that. In other instances, it's like accidentally telling your boss that you think they're terrible on Facebook and not realizing that they're your friend. And I really felt COVID-19 as a kind of COVID context collapse, where everything, like home, school, like everything collapsed into itself, and then we're all online and looking into each other's homes, and then until we kind of all figured out the blur feature or how to put photos up, it's like, what does their house look like? And it's and the other thing too, I'm fascinated, like I noticed something like the camera will bring you closer than you could actually talk to a person, so it's like you're so there's like new forms of intimacy that have come up that I've been really interested in. I just remember watching this guy playing a trumpet and just being so close, like the camera, like you never get that close if you were at a show. It's like watching that, so it was really like, yeah, I think of that being too close to see kind of thing.
One last question?
Yeah, one last.
Can you take it?
Can I ask?
Do you want to give it a go? It's really difficult on the stream.
Yes, thank you all so much. So interesting. Just on the same theme of intimacy, I was struck by, is it going back for more? Is that intimacy?
trade it back in computers. I already explained about the lack of real friends. You know, I think it could be. It's about a relationship, I suppose, is what you're sort of asking, because that is going back for more. Is having a relationship with someone. So our relationships have changed in the past 2 years. But just because, you know, and to bring it to the digital, I would say, is that, you know, those relationships we kept in lockdown, because I know we keep talking about lockdown, but I think it was traumatic for us and we need to talk about it. You know, those relationships which we kept going in lockdown online, on the computer, were very interesting and different. We did keep going back for more, and you may be have been living in a house with other people who you may not have been even able to talk to anymore, because they were still there and you were seeing them every day, and it's like, oh, it's you again, you know. You know, when it doesn't mean those digital relationships are less real, I guess I want to say, because sometimes people think that our online friends are not real ones, and that our digital communication isn't real communication. But I think lockdown proved that it was, and I think it's coming through in a lot of artwork is our way of trying to contextualize that experience.
Weirdly, like, again, kind of going back to my previous answer, but even when you see like the less attractive parts of yourself reflected in this screen by how you like interact with other people, I weirdly feel like it's made my, not in a unilateral way, but I think generally in observing myself over time, I think weirdly, by recognizing my limitations in participating in intimacy through the digital, my physical in real life, which is such a weird term, as though like you're not in real life anymore, but I feel like my in real life relationships have actually gotten better, or at least I've gotten better at mitigating them in a weird way. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, sorry, I'm just going to scroll very quickly to the end, yes. So thank you to our artists, really interesting, engaging, sometimes surprising discussion. I was lots there really to think about in relation to our project, so really valuable, so thank you. Thank you to our audience, thank you for your interest and your engagement. Thank you to Sophie and Imma. What's that? A performance? Thank you to Sophie and Imma for hosting us, which we've really valued as well. It's nice to be here in person. During the pandemic in our other project, we were having talks with Imma, but we were never here. So this is fantastic to be here, and particularly in the context of Imma Nights. So just to say that this is the beginning of our thinking with artists, and well, actually we have been over our last project. So we'd like to encourage you, I suppose, to link up with us and to get involved. So as Izzy mentioned earlier, we will be having 2 artist residencies, one in the UK and one in Ireland, and they are going to be advertised in September, October, with a January start. We'll also have a group exhibition which will be by open submission. sometime around early 2023, you know, to be seen. We'll have another talk in 2023, which we can't wait for. And there's some other things like coding workshops, forums, conference forthcoming to be planned. So please do join our mailing list, which is on our website. And also follow us on Twitter or on Full Stack Feminism. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Sophie.
Emma, thank you very much. And of course, Elle and Jay is so valuable in getting insight into your work also. So as you can hear, kind of volume is increasing, and if you will stick around, please do, because we have a complimentary drink. And you can have a ticket, bring over to our Flying Dog bar that's across the way. So actually, you can get a ticket and you enjoy it. Please stick around and enjoy the rest of the evening.